Bringing back voluntary segregation on college campuses next on the Campus Roundup. Hello, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. This week we're looking at the growth of neo-segregation on college campuses. To talk more about this, we welcome Dion Pierre, a research associate at the National Association of Scholars. Dion, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. How are you?
Good. Before we begin, I got to tell you, I just came up for post-tenure review at my university, and some of my publications were with the National Association of Scholars. Wonderful, wonderful organization. And some of my liberal colleagues tried to act as if the NAS wasn't a legitimate scholarly group. I don't suppose that's going to surprise you, is it?
Oh, no, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Very sad. And you know, the place that we are now in culture, you've written a very, very important study. You have talked about how neo-segregation is coming back to campuses. Define neo-segregation as you define it in your report.
Neo-segregation, that term describes voluntary segregation of minority and black college students on college campuses. Oftentimes this segregation is voluntary. Many times universities cultivate and sustain that segregation.
Exactly. And what we're seeing is separate graduation ceremonies, all sorts of separate orientations. Give us a list of some of the ways that colleges are rediscriminating by neo-segregation.
Yes. So the most important category in our study are the segregated residence halls. 75 schools in our study of 173 offer those to all minority students, particularly Black, Latino, Asian. Sometimes there are also multicultural houses, which are for non-white students generally. We also have segregated orientations and diversity fly-in programs. Diversity fly-ins bring minority students to campus. During the college admissions process, they get a special visit. Sometimes it's paid for. That is then followed up again with the segregated orientation for accepted minority students in the fall. That might be Black, Latino, or Asian as well. And what this does is it teaches students that race is the most formative part of their personhood.
So these diversity fly-ins, universities are actually flying kids in the same way they would do potential scholarship football players, flying kids in and then trying to sell the school to these kids on the basis of diversity and suggesting to them that if you come to our campus, the segregational aspects of our campus are something you should be proud of, and you should. What are the reasons why you should consider us first?
Yeah, that is part of the reason that colleges do this. They want to make themselves attractive to minority students, but the whole thing is kind of bizarre. I spoke to a Black student of African descent from Wesleyan University who told me that she went to her segregated portion of the diversity fly-in. They said Wesleyan's great, but then a second later they said that Wesleyan was home to all kinds of microaggressions and forms of white supremacy and the like.
It is odd, isn't it, that while they're pushing these diversity initiatives, they're tearing down their own population of students. It's as if we've reached the point where a insufficiently diverse college in the middle of a very white population base is inherently racist. We've got to bring in minority kids to fix that, but we have to warn these minority kids that it's so bad on campus that we're going to segregate you once you're here. Is that pretty much how it sounds?
That's pretty much how it is. It's very strange. At Brown University, they call incoming minority students third worlders. They're shuffled to this program called the Third World Transition Program, and it's all about what a terrible racist place Brown University is.
So I guess the $64,000 question for me is how generally, I don't know if your survey covered this, but how do minority kids respond to this? I mean, is this something that many minority kids are looking for? Are they weighing their options based on who's going to give them the most segregation, or are they skeptical of this? In your experience, how do the kids who are being targeted for this kind of program respond?
They respond in varied ways. Some Black students who come from upper middle class neighborhoods and went to predominantly white schools find something appealing in neo-segregation. For some, it's the first time they've ever been exposed to that kind of thinking. For some Black students, neo-segregation is kind of more of the same because they may have come from an urban center where that is minority majority. Almost always, though, the way all students react after they've joined these programs is to begin engaging in these forms of tribalism. They start looking for any kind of racial offense, looking for microaggressions and the like in the curriculum, things of that nature.
Is it fair to say that these university programs aren't really about integrating the population? They're not really about getting beyond racial disharmony by having people live together and work together and study together. This is about perpetuating a system of victimhood, keeping certain kids believing that they are always victims and targeting those kids, regardless of their intentions or their worldview, who happen to be perhaps Caucasian, always making them, just simply by their very existence, engaging in microaggressions.
Yes, I mean that's a great explanation for it. You know, the kinds of articles that people read online, the mobbing of Nicholas Christakis at Yale, all of these insane stories are a product of neo-segregation, making minority students think that race is the most important part of their character, but also that they are oppressed. Even if they are at a school like Yale or Cornell or Harvard, the idea is that they're still oppressed and fighting forms of white supremacy, some that are hidden and that no one else can see but them.
Tell me the difference between what they're arguing now and maybe one step into the future when these universities might argue, in the name of actual social justice, we can't admit any Caucasian students. Now, I know they wouldn't do it because that makes up a huge amount of the money they bring in. But philosophically, Dion, why couldn't they, based on the same argument they're making to segregate the schools, why couldn't they just do it officially and keep non-minority students out altogether?
Well, it would probably make more sense for black students to repopulate the historically black colleges before colleges decide that they're going to stop admitting white students. But you know, who knows with where things are headed? It seems that any ridiculous scenario is possible in this cartoon world where segregation creates diversity and inclusion.
I love your characterization of it as cartoonish. I wish that was the cartoonish. Cartoons are usually somewhat funny. And there's nothing really funny about this in a pathetic way. I love reading your study. You actually go back in the opening to look at Yale University in the early 1960s, right? The Jim Crow era.
Yes.
And explain the link between what we're doing now and what we were doing right before we got rid of Jim Crow in universities.
Well, before we had segregation, the 60s happened, the country decided that it wanted integration, but universities began doing exactly opposite to that. The black students who came to the universities in the 60s either asked to be segregated or the universities segregated them in various programs.
So why is there no effort outside of universities? The vast majority of these universities are public schools. They are funded by taxpayer dollars. They take incredible amounts of federal donations. At the state level, there's not a state in the union that advocates or allows segregation. There is not a federal entity that supports segregation. Why are we allowing colleges and universities to get rid of this kind of racism?
People are too afraid to talk about it. People are afraid to scratch too deep and see where this all leads. The reason people are afraid to talk about it is because neo-segregation is intimately linked to the racial preference regime on college campuses. In neo-segregation at Yale, part of this study, I show how Yale's decision to use racial preferences in admissions directly caused black students to segregate once they got on campus. They felt as if they were there merely for show. They felt as if their presence on campus wasn't respected by others, and they were inspired by all of these ideas that were in the zeitgeist at the time, black nationalism, Malcolm X, things like that, and they really, really wanted to segregate. The public so far has decided that it's not going to have a conversation about that, but that's partly because the mainstream press refuses to cover this.
Now, you made the point, and I'd like to close by asking you about this, that we're doing these kids no favors. By giving them segregated everything, both on campus and when they get out of school, they actually suffer because of that. What are the ways in which these kids who are segregated for their own racial good, that they fail to measure up on college campuses and beyond?
Well, they are existing in a whole other alternative part of the university. The best witness to this has been students at places like Yale who have complained that black students get involved in these segregated programs and then they aren't very much involved in the rest of university life. People just hang out in the cultural centers and they don't get involved in the Yale Political Union or the Yale Daily News, things like that. So it makes it harder for students to enjoy college, all of this race baiting. It's also unclear how these students will go out into the wider world. They're being taught for 4 years that any white person they meet, no matter how liberal, is a seething racist on the inside. It will cause these students to be unable to form meaningful relationships across racial lines, to network and job opportunities and things of that nature. It's very destructive.
Is there any hope moving forward that minority voices, which ironically are the voices that the universities listen to, if minority voices of students began to push back, do you think that would be one alternative to fix this? Or what would your solutions to this problem be?
Yes, I think it's very important for minority students to push back against this. I think one of the reasons they or we don't is because there's a social cost to speaking out against racial separatism, black nationalism. The idea, if you're a person of color, is that you're supposed to be perpetually at war with the system. It's supposed to be your enemy. And so the idea that a person of color would want to preserve the system, to try to make America better, to make the multiracial project work, as Dr. King saw it in the 1960s, is tantamount to treachery. So minority students absolutely have to speak out.
Dion Pierre, this is a very, very important piece of work you've done. You're with a remarkable organization in the National Association of Scholars. It was a pleasure to speak with you, and I hope we can have you back again soon. For the final fix, I want to return to the opening comment of that really informative interview with Dion. It's true that when I was recently coming up for a post-tenure review, they were evaluating my career at this point, I actually had to fight to get the NAS, the National Organization of Scholars, to be considered an actual academic group, even though this wonderful organization is founded by professors, it tailors to professors who are not part of the radical liberal MLA, Modern Language Association. And so when you think about the work that the College Fix does, no one does it better than the College Fix. The student journalists provide incredible content. We've got guest interviews with people like Dion. It's a remarkably diverse group of people across the country who are trying to push back against educational monolithic worldviews at college campuses. But this is one of the reasons why things can't get fixed. When you get a voice like Dion's, when you hear the kind of things that we report on the College Fix, that liberal progressive bubble on college campuses is utterly immune to hearing any idea that challenges what it's doing. If they had even a modicum of willingness to open their minds to research and scholarship that are done outside of that bubble, maybe we'd fix these things a whole lot sooner. And that is the final fix. Be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix by joining us on all of our social media platforms. For the Campus Roundup, I'm Dr. Duke, and we'll see you next time.